Oh, magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he heard me. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. I'm blessed. I'm blessed, y'all, because I trust in him. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Oh, that men would praise the Lord for his goodness, wonderful works to the children of men. For the Lord, he is good, and his mercies everlasting, and his truth endure to all generations.
Magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together, so everyone can see his glory fill the earth. Let all the people bow, come before him now, the ancient of days. Let the name of the Lord be praised. Let his name be praised. Magnify the Lord with me. Hallelujah. Let us exalt his name together, so everyone can see his glory fill the earth. Let all the people bow.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Naomi Hambry, and this is my beautiful friend Bridget, and we're here to invite you all and welcome you all this morning to our wonderful program, which is called Is God for Real?, which is a fantastic title. Who was here last night? We see Oh, great. Lots of people. And thank you for coming back again. I know it was wonderful last night, wasn't it? And those of you who weren't here, we missed you, and we're glad that you're here today. Just a couple of housekeeping points. If you've got your mobile phone, can you take it out and wave it in the air? And then turn it off. Just check it, because sometimes we think we've done it and we haven't. And for those of you who weren't here last night, bathrooms, if you need them, you go straight out the front door there and down over to the side here. And the men's toilets is on the right first, and then the women's are second. And now Bridget's going to tell you about what we're going to be doing.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Good morning, everyone. Well, we had such a wonderful time last night. We were taught about, does God exist? And is there anything we can trust? So if you are not here last night, you missed out. But you are in for a treat again today. But before I tell you today's topics, let me tell you what's coming next Friday. Next Friday, we'll be having 2 more topics at 7 p.m. again in the evening. And it's the Jesus myth. You don't want to miss that one. And also, born to live forever. That's another topic next Friday. And Saturday, there's more topics that are going to be shared as well. And you know what's happening next Saturday after the topics? We have lunch. So don't miss out. We'll be having a special lunch, and we'll love it for you to join us.
Thanks, Bridget. That sounds fantastic. And, these topics often generate lots of questions and comments. So what we do is encourage you to just hold on to those questions. And we've got a card here, which we get at the end, and you can actually write your questions on there, and then Peter will answer them for you. And with that, we'll just get Peter, invite Peter Watts. Can you all give him a warm welcome, please, ladies and gentlemen?
A warm Perth welcome.
Yes. So we'll just ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
The first one is, how did you go from believer to atheist?
Great.
Well, no,
How long
the
have you got?
opposite.
Believer to
How did you
atheist. No, I
come-
definitely didn't do
How
that.
did you go from atheist to believer?
Hasn't happened yet anyway. But no, I did. I was an atheist who became a believer, and that's really a long story. There was certainly a situation where God got my attention, and perhaps we'll talk about that a little later in the series. Through the series, I'll share little pieces of my own journey. But yes, God got my attention, and then I began to explore some of the subjects that we're exploring in this series. And so, I wanted to know, are there good evidences, are there good answers, especially for people who, like me, may not believe. Say, well, how do you know? And what evidence suggests this? And so began to explore that. But we'll share a little more as we go through the series.
Great.
Thank you for that. And you're probably wondering, you told us about yesterday and next week. You didn't tell us what we are doing today. Today we are talking about, did we really evolve? And there's a question here, Peter, and it says, is there an exploration to the fossil evidence archaeologists and scientists have believed to what we evolved from?
Indeed. Excellent question, and we are going to talk about that in our next hour. So we're actually going to talk about the fossil record, we're going to talk about dinosaurs, we're going to talk about a whole host of things. And we're going to try and cram it into now, which will be really difficult, so we probably should get started soon.
Yep, exactly. Would you allow me to pray for you?
Please do.
Please join me as we bow our heads in prayer. Dear Jesus, thank you so much for this time that we can come together and learn all these interesting things. Please be with Peter as he shares this message with us and all the knowledge. We pray that may we be attentive and learn something from this. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Bridget and Naomi. And just to mention again the brochure, if you have a brochure, we also want to provide you with an extended schedule. So when you leave here today, you'll also get an insert inside the brochure because next Friday evening we have meetings again at 7, as Bridget has said, but that is not the end of the series. We have more meetings, and we're going to be talking about some fascinating topics, and I will mention that again at the end of today. All right, let's get into today's topic, which is, did we really evolve? Now, if you were here last night, you'll have heard me say I grew up in the UK, went to state school, left school at 16, became a car mechanic. But through school, I got taught evolution, and I thoroughly believed evolution. So did my brother. That's what we were taught at school. And so I believed in molecules to man evolution. That's how I thought we got here. And we want to ask the question, did we really evolve? What has been discovered? Let's have a look. There are, of course, two competing theories in regards to how we all got here. There are really only two. Either we got here by gradual steps of evolution, change over time, or we were designed, created by someone. Those are really the two options. I know somebody once said, well, maybe life was seeded on earth from somewhere else. You heard that theory? But even then you have to go, well, was that life created or seeded? Was it evolved? So at the end of the day, it's the two competing theories. And of course, the Bible's first line is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is, that He designed the world that we live on. He designed the environment. He created the plants and the animals, and then ultimately He created humans. That's the story of special creation, a plan that God carried out to design human beings. That is one view of our origins. The other view, of course, is evolution. And when we talk about evolution today, we're really talking about the kind of evolution from molecules to man. In other words, that we arose from, single-celled organisms that multiplied and grew over time, no directed process, just chance, random events, until it produced all the complex life forms on planet Earth, including us. That is the view, and that's the view that I used to believe. But when we talk about evolution, we need to understand there are probably 6 types of evolution that we could talk about today. So, cosmic evolution. Cosmic evolution is a theory of space and time, how that originated according to evolutionary theory. Then you have chemical evolution. Where did the chemicals come from? And chemical evolution is about the theory of the chemicals evolving somehow. Then you've got stellar and planetary evolution, which is really the origin of stars, galaxies, and planets. There's a theory about that, an evolutionary theory about that. Then we've got number 4, which is what most people think of evolution, which is organic evolution. In other words, the origin of life. How did life emerge from non-living chemicals? That's a theory of evolution, or organic evolution. Number 5, macroevolution. Macroevolution is the idea that one kind of creature over time changes into another kind of creature. So that you might have, mice and then cats and dogs and sheep and cows, and that they're all actually related and they evolve from one another. That's macroevolution, one kind changing into another kind. And then finally, number 6 is microevolution. Of those 6, microevolution is basically the changes that take place within a kind of creature. And we do observe that. We see that. Darwin described this as natural selection. I would probably call it adaptation. Okay? But microevolution is a phrase that describes that adaptation. So, for instance, this is what Darwin observed when he was on the Galapagos Islands. He observed the finches, and he would go from different islands, and he would see finches on one island that had bigger beaks and another finch on another island that had smaller beaks, and he recognized that they had a common ancestor that was a finch, but by adaptation to its environment, they had developed in a different way because they were adapting to their environment. But here's the thing. This did not result in any extra information from the outside, but rather was adapting from information that that creature already contained. I'll give you an example. It's probably a poor example, but here it is. Let's suppose I take off my shoes and socks. I won't do it. But let's suppose I take off my shoes and socks and I walk around the tarmac and the pavements of Perth for the next month. How many of you think that the skin on my feet is going to toughen up? Yes? No? Who thinks yes? Who thinks no? You believe in microevolution. Adaptation, right? So when I said to you the other night that I'll tell you what I don't believe about evolution and what I do, this is the one that has been observed. We see it all the time. It's called adaptation. but I do not believe in the other 5. And so for the purposes of this conversation, when I talk about evolution, I'm talking about molecules to man evolution. Okay? That's what we're going to talk about. Sometimes the debate between creation and evolution is sometimes framed in a debate between God and science. God versus science, right? This is Time magazine back in 2006. Front cover, God versus science. But listen to what it says in the subtitle. It says, a spirited debate between atheist biologist Richard Dawkins and Christian geneticist Francis Collins. Which of those two is a scientist? Both of them, right? One's an atheist, one's a Christian. They're both scientists. So is it God versus science? It can't be, because they're both scientists. You get it? It's not God versus science. It's one view of science versus another view of science. It's one interpretation of the evidence versus another interpretation of the evidence. Don't be fooled by this idea of God versus science, because there are scientists who believe in evolution, there are scientists who don't. And most of us think that all scientists believe in evolution. It's not true. In fact, I know that's not true because a friend of mine edited a book called In 6 Days, Why 50 Scientists Choose to Believe in Creation. Let me tell you how this book came about. There was a female student going to Sydney University. And in one of the science classes in the university, they were told by the lecturer, no scientist with a PhD would ever believe that God created in 6 days. And she's sitting in the audience there and she's thinking, I'm sure I know one. And so she went and spoke to John Ashton, who is a friend of mine. And John Ashton is a PhD chemist. He's done his field's research work in chemistry. He's been doing that for decades. I think he became a professor recently. But John Ashton, so she went to see her friend John Ashton, and he said, well, I'm sure I can find more than a handful of PhD scientists who do believe that God created in 6 days. And so he found a few people who found a few people, and before long he had 80 scientists from various fields, and he asked them to write an essay on why they believed that God created from their field of science. He took the best 50 and put them in a book. And I recommend the book to you. It's In 6 Days, Why 50 Scientists Choose to Believe in Creation. And they were, there are physicists and mathematicians and biologists and chemists and zoologists and all sorts of different fields of science, people writing from their perspective why they believe that God created. So I just want you to understand it's not every scientist that believes in molecules to man evolution. Most of the time in the news media, we usually get a very biased view. We really just have one side of the story, that evolution is assumed as fact, and that's what we have. This was a lift out from a Sunday paper in Melbourne back in 1999, and it's called Divine Science. Notice what it says. First came the Big Bang, much later the first spark of life in a primordial soup. A cell, a swamp, an ape, a human. It's a common thread in every science book. Familiar, not every science book, by the way. Familiar to every student. But many scientists, notice this, but many scientists believe the origins of life are very different. The evidence, they say, is clear and compelling. It points not to evolution, but to creation, a deliberate act by an intelligent God. And there's a whole host of articles within that pull out from the newspaper. You see, I mentioned last night, if you were here last night, I talked a little bit about spontaneous generation. If we believe in molecules to man evolution, if we believe life arose by chance from non-living chemicals, then we're really going back to spontaneous generation. And spontaneous generation was believed, Aristotle believed in spontaneous generation. He wrote about it, the Greek philosopher. And that was regarded as fact for 2,000 years. Until somebody came along by the name of Louis Pasteur. You ever heard of him? Louis Pasteur in 1862 disproved spontaneous generation. And he came to the conclusion that life comes from life. And that's still a hurdle for the evolutionists to overcome. Where did life come? How did life emerge from non-living chemicals? Because we don't observe that now. Life comes from life. Even if you think of the fathers of modern science, sometimes people say, oh, well, if you believe in creation, that's just a religious belief and that's going to impede your scientific endeavour, right? But think about it. The fathers of modern science were believers in God and believers in the God of creation. Sir Isaac Newton, physics. Leonardo da Vinci, hydraulics. Michael Faraday, electric generator. Are you happy that we've got electricity today? James Joule, electric current. Robert Boyle, gas dynamics. Louis Pasteur, bacteriology. Joseph Lister, antiseptic. Johannes Kepler, celestial mathematics. All these guys are giants and fathers of modern science. But they believed in God and the God of creation. In fact, they would argue that because they believed that God created this world, they believed that they had an obligation to investigate it, to investigate the universe. In fact, the Bible indicates that too. It says, behold the heavens. What does that mean? Look at them, right? Behold the heavens. And so that was their motivation. So here's one of the questions that often crops up in relation to the topic of, did we really evolve or were we specially created? How old is the earth? And, you know, if you read the Bible, it actually tells you that Adam was created on day 6 of creation, that he was 930 years old when he died. It tells you how old he was when he had one of his children, not his first son. It tells us that he was 130 years of age when Seth was born, and then it tells you how long he lived before he had a child, and so all the way up to Abraham. And Abraham lived 4,000 years ago. And so you look at the Bible, it's just a few thousand years of history. And people say, well, that can't be true. The earth looks just so old. Well, how do you know what old looks like? You know, it's an assumption that we've made, and we've made it basically on evolutionary ideas about geology. So geology is the study of rocks, okay? And you might go to a place like this, is Grand Canyon, and many evolutionary geologists believe that, you know, all of those sedimentary layers that you see at Grand Canyon, well, maybe they were laid down one layer, say, one layer a year, layer of dust, and maybe next year there's another layer of dust, and then another layer, millions of layers, must be millions of years, right? And within those sedimentary layers, we find fossils. And what they do is they date the rocks. I'm going to tell you how they date them in a minute. They date the rocks and then they date the fossil by the rock that surrounds it. Okay? But how do they date the rocks? Well, they date the rocks using radiometric dating methods. These are methods like potassium argon, uranium lead, rubidium strontium, where they compare different elements within the rock. Let me give you an example. Let's take uranium lead. They'll measure the rock, they'll slice it up, send it to the lab, and they'll examine it, and they'll find out how much uranium is in the rock, and then comparison by how much lead is in the rock, because uranium is radioactive, and it decays over time. And we've measured how it decays over time in the current circumstance. It decays over time, and lead is a daughter product. So you have a parent product, uranium, and a daughter product, lead. And so they say, well, we know the current rate of decay, so let's just extrapolate backwards until there's no lead, and you've just got uranium. That's how old the rock is. Pretty simple, right? However, there are some problems with these dating methods. Number one, how much of each substance was present in the rock originally? What if lead was present in the rock at its formation? That's going to throw your calculation way out, right? Has the decay rate remained constant over millions of years? One of the things about evolution is they say everything changes. Has the decay rate remain constant over millions of years? And also, was any of each substance added by an environmental change or catastrophic event, such as an earthquake, volcanic eruption, or flooding? Because they know that they can have an effect. I want you to notice what Frederick Zuneman said about this back in 1982. He said, "The age of our globe is presently thought to be some 4.5 billion years based on radioactive rates of uranium and thorium. Such confirmation may be short-lived, as nature is not to be discovered quite so easily. There has been in recent years the horrible realization that radio decay rates are not as constant as previously thought, nor are they immune to environmental influences. And this could mean that the atomic clocks are reset during some global disaster, and the events which brought the Mesozoic period to a close may not be 65 million years ago, but rather within the age and memory of man." That's a fascinating statement. He's saying, as a scientist, he's looking at the evidence, and he's saying there's some problems here. And when he says the Mesozoic period came to a close at 65 million years ago, he's talking about the end of the dinosaurs, which is believed by evolutionary biologists and geologists to be 65 million years ago, right? But he's saying that could be within the age and memory of man. I'm going to talk a little bit more about dinosaurs in a moment, but I want to bring you another quote. This is from William Stanfield, California Polytechnic State University, instructor of biology. He says, "It is obvious," notice his words here, and this is written decades ago. "It is obvious," he says, "that radiometric techniques may not be the absolute dating methods that they are claimed to be. Age estimates on a given geological stratum by different radiometric methods are often quite different, sometimes by hundreds of millions of years. There is no absolutely reliable long-term radiological clock. The uncertainties inherent in radiometric dating are disturbing to geologists and evolutionists." What his point is if you take a piece of rock, you slice it up, you send it to the lab on this side of town, they give you a date based on one kind of method. You take the same rock, send it to that side of town, send it to another lab, use a different method. They can come back with different figures, sometimes by hundreds of millions of years. Which one would you trust? Why would you trust either? You see what I'm saying? They've also found a rock that has been formed. They found a clock once that had gone down with a ship, and the rock had formed around the clock. Rock around the clock, I know. But which is older, the rock or the clock? See what I'm saying? Part of it has to do with the fossil record. Does the fossil record provide conclusive evidence for evolution? Most people think so. A lot of people would think, well, obviously evolution's true. Look at the fossil record. And then you ask them and say, what about the fossil record? Well, I'm not sure. Let's have a look at some fossil record. This is Dr. David Raup. He wrote this in 1979. It says, "Darwin's theory of natural selection has always been closely linked to evidence from fossils. And probably most people assume that fossils provide a very important part of the general argument that is made in favour of Darwinian interpretations of the history of life. Unfortunately, this is not strictly true." So you have people in various fields, like biology and geology and paleontology, who assume that, well, the evidence exists in another field, but in my field, does the fossil record support evolution? Does it take millions of years to form a fossil? Here's a good question to begin with. Let's suppose for a moment that my cat died, and I put the cat, well, not here, out on the lawn. I put my cat out on the lawn, and I peg out a fence and say, "Do not disturb cat fossilizing." How many of you think the cat's going to fossilize? What's going to happen to the cat? You ever seen roadkill? Right? It doesn't fossilize. The birds come along, the wind and the rain, it breaks down, disappears. How do you fossilize something? Is it gradually a layer of dust once a year that No, you have to bury it. You have to bury it rapidly. Something like a bucket of wet cement. Bury it rapidly. Then you'll maybe form a fossil. It takes specific conditions to form a fossil. In fact, geologists now know and accept and recognize that the best conditions for forming fossils are flood conditions, which is kind of ironic because the Bible describes a global flood at the time of Noah. And if you doubt that it was global, anybody been to Mount Everest? Me neither. Do you know Mount Everest is actually growing a little bit? So if you're going to climb it, do it this year because next year it'll be bigger. But did you know that on the highest levels of Mount Everest there are marine fossils? Most people don't know that, but that's true. They found them there, I think it was 1927. Marine fossils on the highest level. What are they doing up there? Well, evidently that place was underwater once. And there are fossils all over the world. 95% of the fossil record is marine life, by the way. So how do you make a fossil? Well, let's have a look at this. Describe this as fast food. How long did it take him to eat his meal? 1 million years? Now, you can only preserve that fossil if you rapidly bury it in sedimentary layer, like snap frozen. And you preserve that fish who's eating another fish, but he never got time to finish his dinner. What about this one? This is an ichthyosaur fossil. This is a fossilized ancient marine creature, obviously extinct now. Ichthyosaur fossil, and this ichthyosaur is giving birth to another ichthyosaur. Ladies, how long does it take you to give birth? Probably felt like millions of years. But it doesn't take millions of years to give birth. You only preserve that if it's buried rapidly. And this is the way we think that we got most of the fossils. This is horseshoe crab, and this is significant because this is one of what is called an example of a living fossil. That is to say, we have it in the fossil record, supposed to be millions of years old, but we have them alive swimming around today. And there are more than 500 documented examples of living fossils. They're in the fossil record millions of years ago, but they're here today, and they haven't changed. Why not? When Darwin was writing, and they were talking about fossilization, they believed that no soft tissue organism could possibly be preserved because they believed it took a long time to create a fossil. And you know, if you've ever seen jellyfish washed up on the beach, how long do they last in the sunshine? They deteriorate, don't they? But they have found fossilized jellyfish. Again, evidence of rapid burial. Do you know what? They've even found fossilized raindrops where, they've had sedimentary layer come in, it started to firm up, then the rain has come, and then another sedimentary layer has flowed over the top of that, and they've preserved the raindrops. Now, this is interesting. This is Dr. Mary Schweitzer. A few years ago, they had on SBS television, they had a documentary. It was called Dinosaurs, the Hunt for Life. And it documented the work of Dr. Mary Schweitzer. In the 1990s, Dr. Mary Schweitzer was working on the leg bone of a Tyrannosaurus rex that they had dug out of the ground. And she noticed that not all of the leg bone was fossilized. And she found some material, and you could actually stretch it, and she found what she believed were blood vessels and blood cells. And she sent them to her boss, a man called Dinosaur Jack Horner. And he said, well, it can't be, go back and test your results. And they did 17 different tests on the material, trying to prove that what she thought she had was not the case. Because if a dinosaur bone is fossilized and 65 million years old, you can't have blood vessels and blood cells. But they did these 17 different kinds of tests, and they discovered this is actually soft tissue in a dinosaur leg bone. Since then, they've found many other examples of soft tissue in dinosaur bones. So what do you think their response was? Did they say, well, these can't be 65 million years old? Or no, what they said was, it must last longer than we thought. Because we can't admit that we could be wrong. Chicago conference. This was a Chicago conference on evolution that was reported on in Newsweek magazine back in October the 3rd, 1980. That's like 42 years ago. Well, 41 and a bit. Notice what they reported in Newsweek. It says, evidence from fossils now points overwhelmingly away from the classic Darwinism most Americans learned in high school. I bet you don't hear about that. That was 42 years ago. I never got to heard that. I never heard that statement at school. You see, the question we could ask is, were you there? In Job 38 verse 4, God asks a question. He says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Excellent question. Where were you? You weren't even a twinkle in your father's eye. Right? I mean, you'd have to have an eyewitness. You know, even according to the biblical record, it says God created this world. He created the plants, the vegetation, the animals. He created a garden. He set up paradise. Then he created people and put them in it. They did not witness it. Neither Adam nor Eve witnessed creation. They had to believe by faith. They just turned up and there was the garden. Here's another news article back in 2000 in the Herald Sun, another Melbourne newspaper. Science is reconsidering its belief that life happened by chance. There are scientists challenging the idea that this Darwinian theory, we're stretching it and we're stretching it and we're stretching it, it doesn't seem to fit. Now, that's not all scientists, but some scientists are challenging that belief. One of them is a scientist by the name of Michael J. Behe. He's a professor in microbiology. He wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box, The Biochemical Challenge to Evolution. And he writes this in page 187. He says, in the face of the enormous complexity that modern biochemistry has uncovered in the cell, the scientific community is paralyzed. No one at Harvard University, no one at the National Institutes of Health, no member of the National Academy of Sciences, no Nobel Prize winner, no one at all can give a detailed account of how psyllium or vision or blood clotting or any complex biochemical process might have developed in a Darwinian fashion. But we are here. The plants and animals are here. The complex systems are here. All these things got here somehow, if not in a Darwinian fashion, then how? He's an intelligent man asking intelligent questions, and I want to read something to you. It's in here somewhere. He makes a statement on another page of his book, and I want to read it to you. But I had a friend illustrate this quote for you. So you look at the picture, and I'll read the quote. Okay? He says, imagine a room in which a body lies crushed flat as a pancake. A dozen detectives crawl around examining the floor with magnifying glasses for any clue to the identity of the perpetrator. In the middle of the room, next to the body, stands a large grey elephant. The detectives carefully avoid bumping into the pachyderm's legs as they crawl and never even glance at it. Over time, the detectives get frustrated with their lack of progress, but resolutely press on, looking even more closely at the floor. You see, textbooks say detectives must get their man, so they never think of elephants. There is an elephant in the room full of scientists who are trying to explain the development of life. The elephant is labelled intelligent design. To a person who does not feel obliged to restrict his search to unintelligent causes, the straightforward conclusion is that many biochemical systems were designed. They were designed not by the laws of nature, not by chance and necessity, but rather they were planned. The designer knew what the systems would look like when they were completed. The designer took steps to bring the systems about. Life on Earth at its most fundamental level, in its most critical components, is the product of intelligent activity. And he says, the conclusion of intelligent design flows naturally from the data itself not from sacred books or sectarian beliefs. So he says, if you look at the evidence, it seems to point in this direction. He mentions vision there, and Darwin actually made a statement about eyesight and vision in his book, The Origin of Species, page 167. He says, to suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. That's Darwin. Because he's basically saying that life has to arise by small, gradual, single steps. But when you have something like the eye, what good is the eye without a lens? What good is the eye without the retina? What good is the eye without the optic nerve? What good is the eye without a brain that can interpret the optic nerve? You know, all of those things, they would be eliminated as obsolete if you arose this function, but it wasn't connected to the other functions, it wasn't doing anything. Natural selection would eliminate it. So you have to have all the pieces in place for it to work. And Michael Behe calls this, what has he called it? Irreducible complexity. In other words, it's so complex that if you take one of those elements away, it doesn't work. They've got to work together. Michael Behe appeared on this documentary back in 2004, Unlocking the Mystery of Life, and maybe some of you remember Dr. Brendan Nelson. He was the Liberal leader for a time. I think he was Health Minister and Defence Minister for a time. He stood up in Parliament, he was on an interview, somebody interviewed him, and he said he thinks that when he was Minister of Education, he said every high school student should have the opportunity to watch this video. I don't know how many have. You see, we talked last night a little bit about SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, putting our radio telescopes out into the sky and saying if we have coded information, well, we'll know there is intelligence. Notice what he says here. Any day now we'll pick up a tiny coded signal, then we'll know for certain that there is intelligence out there, because coded information does not arise by chance. But then you have another scientist, another lecturer in the biology lab saying the perfectly coded information in each cell would fill many books. But we know for certain that no intelligence created life. You get the contradiction? There was a callback radio show once, and the presenter was interviewing a man who taught science and who believed in biblical creation. And they were taking calls from callers, and a caller rang in and says, one of these days we're going to create life in a laboratory and that'll be the end of you creationists. And the man says, well, if you do create life in a laboratory, it'll have nothing to do with time and chance, but it'll have everything to do with the intelligence that you're putting into those experiments. And he said, we are not putting intelligence into our experiments. And you might be inclined to agree with him. I don't know. But anyway, the Bible, of course, declares that there is a master designer. There is a creator, an intelligent designer, and that is the God of the universe. In fact, Genesis 1:26, it says, then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. So not only did God create the world and all the wonderful things in it, he created human beings, which, by the way, is why I believe that every human being is of unique value. Human life is priceless because humans were made in the image of God. And we don't have the right to just wipe humans off the planet. I want to talk about something that you may have heard of in the news. You remember Adam Goodes when he was playing for the Sydney Swans? And there was somebody in the audience who called him an ape. You remember that? It was a game between Sydney and Collingwood. And I think it was a 13-year-old girl that actually called out, and he pointed her out in the crowd, and she was taken out of the crowd, and there was a big news story about it. Do you remember it? You do? Okay. So here's the thing. Adam Goodes was rightly offended because somebody called him an ape. You go to state school, and they will teach you that we all arose from apes. Why are we not all offended? See what I'm saying? In other words, Adam Goods was rightly offended. But why are we not offended? When this is taught in our schools, it's taught in our universities, that we're nothing more than apes. You know why this is a racist slur, by the way? Because when evolution was first taught, it was taught that some races of human beings are less evolved than other races of human beings. We know that that's nonsense today. We are all one species. We are all Homo sapiens sapiens. But in its infancy, evolution was a racist philosophy. That is why they could take Aborigines, they could behead them and send their heads back in cases back to London. That's what they did, as specimens. Abominable practices, fueled by the idea that you're not really human. But God says you are. So somebody might say, well, what about Adam and Eve? Do you really believe in Adam and Eve? I remember when I shifted from being an atheist to being a believer, and I started investigating the claims of the Bible, my mate back home in England, he says, what, you actually mean you believe in Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and all that? I said, yeah. He said, oh, right, okay. And he thought I'd leapt off the deep end, you know. But did you know that genetically speaking, they have now found evidence that all of us go back to one man and one woman? Did you know that? We're all related. So if I call you brother or sister, you'll understand why. This was genetics. This was in the Washington Post in 1995, and it's referring to something that came out 10 years before this. So from the mid-80s, but this is a report in the Washington Post, November 1995. It says, about 10 years ago, molecular biologists found evidence in human genes that all people share a common female ancestor. What do you think they named her? Eve. They nicknamed her Eve. I wonder why. Now comes corroboration from a different kind of study. Analysis of a part of the Y sex chromosome indicates that modern humans descended from a common male ancestor. So you all are descended from one female ancestor, and you all are descended from one male ancestor, genetically. Is that a coincidence? That's reporting on this study back in 2002, could this be the real Eve, and so forth. And they talk about genetics. All right, now if you believe in molecules to man evolution, that you believe we're related to the animal kingdom and that the animals are related. So here you'll notice a couple of dolphins leaping out of the surf. Oh, well, one of them doesn't look like a dolphin, right? But do you realize that if you believe in evolution, you believe that the cows, so the idea of evolution is that we were in the primordial soup, and then some creatures managed to crawl out of the primordial soup and became amphibians and reptiles and mammals, and here we are. And then they're saying, well, some of the cows went back into the water and became dolphins and whales. There is no fossilized evidence for this, but that's what you're forced to believe. Where did the mammals come from in the water? They're air-breathing mammals, right? I mean, I've actually swam with a dolphin or two, and they're fast swimmers. They look like they were designed to do exactly what they do, right? I mean, can you imagine a halfway between those two? Fred Hoyle, I mentioned him yesterday, professor of astronomy at Cambridge University at one time. He said the chance that higher life forms might have emerged in this way by evolution is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials therein. Tornadoes do not assemble things. They blow things to bits, right? And you think about a plane, what is it that makes a plane fly? You take the engines off, do they fly? No. Take the wings off, do they fly? No. Take the tail off, does that fly? No. Take the guy out of the cockpit, does he fly? No. A 747 is a machine made up of millions of parts of millions of non-flying parts. What makes it fly is intelligent design and creative engineering. And we give prizes to people for inventing those things. But the birds have been flying a lot longer than we have. Right? Who made the birds? In Job chapter 12, by the way, a bird is far more complex than a 747, right? I mean, it can navigate itself, feed itself, reproduce after itself. Seen a 747 do that? Job 12, 7-9. But now ask the beasts, and they will teach you, and the birds of the air, and they will tell you. Or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, and to the fish of the sea will explain to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? Charles Darwin, he said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. I think it's been done. I think it's been discovered. Malcolm Muggeridge was a British journalist and philosopher. He said, I myself am convinced that the theory of evolution, especially the extent to which it's been applied, will be one of the great jokes in the history books of the future. Posterity will marvel that so very flimsy and dubious a hypothesis could be accepted with the incredible credulity that it has. Charles Darwin again, simple insects such as bees making a beehive could be sufficient to overthrow my whole theory. Well, bees do make beehives. There was a man by the name of Professor Mandyam Srinivasan. He was given the Prime Minister's Prize for Science back in about 1996, I think it was by John Howard. And this is what he said. He said, today we are trying to create small conventional aircraft with the brains of a bee. The future challenge is to bring the engineering of a bee, microflyers that can do what bees do. The engineering of a bee. Well, how did the engineering of a bee get in there? You know, it is amazing if you think about it. If you just say to somebody, go to a lab and just make me a mosquito. Or make me a butterfly. Just go make one. If it was that simple. In Psalm 100 verse 3 it says, know that the Lord, He is God, and it is He who made us, and not we ourselves. We are His people and the sheep of His pasture. Darwin wrote a letter to a friend. He said, often a cold shudder has run through me, and I have asked myself whether I may not have devoted myself to a fantasy. We don't teach these quotes in high school. Dr. Robert Jastrow wrote a book called God and the Astronomers. Notice this. He says, at this moment it seems as though science will never be able to raise the curtain on the mystery of creation. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. Some resources. The one I would direct you to, I guess, easily enough is creation.com. If you go to creation.com, you will find, I think there's more than 10,000 documents there on a whole range of issues related to creation evolution. And it's been very helpful to me. Creation.com, I would check that out. You'll find a lot of answers to things that you may have questions about. Creationastronomy.com. There's a guy called Spike Pasaris. He used to work for NASA in the military. He used to work for the military in the US, the military space program. And he went in as an evolutionist and an atheist, and he came out a creationist and a believer. So he makes some very good videos about the solar system and the like. Why is this important? Why does it matter? I think it matters for 4 reasons. Identity, purpose, and hope. We are teaching our young people, and I was one of them at school, that you're nothing but a bucket full of chemicals There is no real purpose to life. You're going to live a while, then you're going to die, and then you're going to fade back into the pool of chemicals. And that's it. Enjoy life. And if we tell our children that they're nothing but a primordial soup, or they're nothing but animals, then we wonder why they have problems with their self-worth. But on the other hand, the Bible declares that you are incredibly unique, that you are incredibly important to God. And we're going to see just how important as we continue in this series. But God offers us identity. We are not animals. We were specially created by a loving Father who loves us. We have a purpose. There is a reason to be alive. And we have hope. It's not over till it's over. There is a hope. And God has a hope. The Bible tells us in Psalm 139 verse 14, I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. Today I do believe that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And I would like for today, if you would do me a favor, and take the card that you have right there on your seat and a pen, and just respond to some things that we've heard this morning. And then we're going to take a break before our second session. So first of all, on the card, there is a little logo, and beneath the logo, I'd like you to write the number 3. This is session number 3 in the series. So just below the logo, write the number 3, okay? And I'd like you to respond to these. Number 1, I believe that God created the heavens and the earth. If you believe that, please tick box number 1 or put yes. And if you think no, just put no, that's fine too. Just answer that question. I believe that God created the heavens and the earth. If you agree with that statement, tick. If not, you can put a cross in there. Number 2, I believe that mankind was created in God's image. If that's you, put a tick in box number 2. Number 3, I would like to know more about the God who created the universe. We have some resources that we want to share with you. If you would like to know more about the God who created the universe, put a tick in box number 4, box number 3. And box number 4, I would like a copy of today's resources. If you would like the notes from today's presentation, we want to make them freely available to you. If you ticked for resources last night, those notes are available for you at the back. If you tick this box, I would like the copy of today's resources. If you would like them via email, put your email address on the card. If you want a hard copy, just put the letter H next to number 4. And we'll get you a hard copy, okay? Put your name, phone number, details on the card. Hand them in. Is somebody there to collect the cards? Would somebody like to volunteer to collect the cards? Maybe one on both sides. That would be great. Somebody to collect the cards. Thank you. And let's go and collect those cards. Fill them in. And then we're going to take a break for about 10 minutes. Thank you for listening. When we come back, we are going to talk about probably the most number 1 asked question amongst believers and unbelievers. Why so much suffering? We'll come back in 10 minutes.
Bless his holy name in heaven and earth. Oh, let all the people bow. Come before him now, the Ancient of Days. Let the name of the Lord be praised. Let his name be praised. Oh, magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. So the whole world can see his glory. His glory fill. Let all the people bow. Hallelujah. the name of the Lord be praised. Let his name be praised. He's worthy, he's worthy, hallelujah, he's worthy.
Oh, magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and delivered me from all my troubles. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. I'm blessed. I'm blessed, y'all, because I trust him. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Oh, that men would praise the Lord for his goodness and for his wonderful works to the children of men. For the Lord, he is good, and his mercies everlasting, and his truth endure to all generations.